Hi, I'm Rod Groskoff. I've been a Freemason for a long time, just under 40 years. And I've held many senior positions in Freemasonry, but really my true love was research, guidance, inspiration, teaching younger Masons. I could never understand why we always had such a bad press. Somehow Masons always have had a bad press, and possibly because we haven't ever answered anyone who's criticized us. And when I think of all those wonderful men who were Freemasons and made such a difference to the world, I just can't understand it. So my focus of my research has in the main been looking at the inspiration that we have of all those wonderful blokes, Benjamin Franklin, Duke Ellington, George Washington, you name them and they come rolling off the tongue. Kings of England, kings of just about everywhere, all been Freemasons. We've had a wonderful bloke here in South Africa, Johannes Hendrikus Brandt. At his graveside, his son-in-law said, Freemasonry made President Brandt what he is today and what he's left with us. Bryce, a member of Parliament of the Liberal government, said of Brandt that the constitution he devised for the Orange Free State was the finest constitution for the government of civilized men. Can you imagine such a wonderful thing? And his family believed that Freemasonry, and so did he, believed that Freemasonry did it for him. And so, over the years, I've spent much of my time researching wonderful men and the difference they've made to the world at large, the value they've added. They've added such wonderful value in South Africa. Our very best architect, Thibault, was a Freemason. And he came here as a mercenary soldier after having trained with Gabriel, the famous architect, who did parts of Versailles. And he came here and he gave us those wonderful Cape Dutch buildings that we still have today, and we glory in them. He gave us such a lovely vision for architecture, Freemason. And his best mate was a guy called Anton Enreich, who was a sculptor trained in Germany. And when one day he was working on a piece and there was criticism and he hammered it to pieces, he bashed this marble statue to pieces with a 4-pound hammer, and then realized what he'd done, and he ran away and escaped and joined the army and ended up in the Cape. And there he became probably our best sculptor. Not only a best sculptor, but a good Freemason. And the man who brought craftsmanship to the Cape. He started the first craft school, Freemason. And this bloke and these men were all part of the same lodge. Johann Andries Truter, probably one of the finest jurists we ever had, was a member of the same lodge, Lodge de Goede Hoop. And then my interest got caught by all the other members of Lodge de Goede Hoop. And they just rolled through my mind, and I wrote papers, academic papers about them, with annotations and dates and quotes and references. And I kept writing these, and over the 20 years or so, would tell these stories over and over again. I mean, did you know that the first speaker of the House of Parliament of the Cape was a fellow called Christoffel Brandt, Jan Brandt's father. And this bloke was the guy who brought democracy to South Africa. Prior to that, everything was owned by a company, whether it was the British East India Company or the Dutch East India Company or the British government. It was all owned by somebody else, and he persuaded them to change this. And so we became a democracy. And he persuaded the government, can you believe this? He persuaded the government that they needed a House of Parliament, a place where Parliament could meet. And the best one he could think of was the assembly rooms of his lodge. Can you believe any government in the world meeting for 30 years in the assembly rooms of the local lodge? And that is to the highest, it is to that kind of extreme and that kind of eminence that Masonry was. And then when I retired, after holding quite a lot of big jobs in Freemasonry, when I retired, my friend said to me, you've got to write these stories down because otherwise they're gone forever. So I wrote them, and I put them together in this book, which we've called Carved in Stone. Incidentally, this is one of my sculptures of Jan Brandt, who's really one of my favorite characters in the whole of Freemasonry and our own history. And so I wrote these stories, but I wrote them in a way that my friend who helped me write this book, he calls it creative non-fiction. So I've added flesh to those dusty old bones. Like Tybalt, I even hint, maybe even suggest, that he had a little affiliation with Lady Anne Barnard. Lady Anne Barnard was the first lady standing in for Lord Macartney at the Cape, and she was very much involved with all of the good things this architect fellow is doing. She got him commissions to do government buildings. He even built 2 houses for her, and she painted a portrait of him, a wonderful portrait, an intimate portrait. And so I've taken the liberty of suggesting that maybe they were a little fond of one another. And so that's the kind of liberty I've taken. And I think you'll enjoy reading this book, because I hope that when people read this book and find out the wonderful things that we've done, that we as Freemasons have done and brought to this country, that we'll have a new respect. People will think again when they talk about Freemasonry. And then the book couldn't stop there, because now I was retired and I was on a roll. So now I've gone further and I've done the story of Johannesburg and Kimberley, the discovery of gold and diamonds, and the Boer War, and it finally ends up with the story of the Union of South Africa after the Boer War. And all through this whole Boer War stories, lovely stories where Masons made a difference. At the surrender of Johannesburg, 2 Freemasons got together, Lord Roberts and Fritz Krause. They got together and they met in a tent, and no one knew what they said. They shook hands on a deal, and the next day Johannesburg was handed over, not a shot fired. The same happened in Bloemfontein. And when it finally came to the end of the Boer War, President Rates, old President Rates, he was now Secretary of State for the Transvaal government, he got together with Kitchener and Steyn, also a Freemason, and they got together and they settled the peace after the Boer War. You know, as Pakenham said, whatever it was for, or whatever it was about, it's over. Because no one could understand the Boer War. I still can't understand the Boer War, even though I've studied it half my life and written a book about it, which is coming on show soon. And I think you'll enjoy this one just as much. Thank you very much.